All millennialists hate Adventists, but we actually have more in common with them in some respects. What? We take the timeline that the early church fathers upheld, that Jesus comes back and then the millennium starts. This is quite obvious, that the day of the Lord is when the Lord returns. But, so here's the question. Find me one verse that says the millennium is on the earth, with kingdoms on the earth. Okay, it doesn't exist, because the only verse that talks about the millennium is Revelation 20. And it talks about it, it says 1,000 years 6 times. Everything else has to be inferred from Old Testament prophecy, which is tied up with all sorts of bad eschatology. Now, there is no explicit verse that talks about the 1,000-year millenniums except for Revelation 20. In Revelation 20, Jesus resurrects all the righteous of all time and gathers them together and takes them to the Father's house. All the elect, all the righteous, all the saved of all time are resurrected or gathered at the day of the Lord, at the beginning of the 1,000 years. That Revelation says that plainly. He takes them to the Father's house. Read 1 Corinthians 15 carefully. He delivers up the kingdom to the Father. They're taken to heaven after the tribulation. At the end of Revelation 20, it says the holy city comes down out of heaven after the 1,000 years. That's this camp of the saints that's surrounded by the Gog-Magog. Because all those that died at the coming of the Lord, that took the mark of the beast, they're all dead. They're resurrected at the end of the 1,000 years. When Jesus resurrects them, when he comes back to the earth with the saints, you see the holy city coming down out of heaven. So there's only one. So all the saints go to heaven, and the only other thing, or the only other implication of them coming to earth, is at the end of the 1,000 years, because the holy city comes down out of heaven, and the saints inhabit the holy city. And it says it's adorned for the bridegroom. That means the saints are in it. It's Christ's city, and it comes down out of heaven. And that city is encompassed by all the lost who are about to be thrown into the lake of fire when the holy city comes down out of heaven, and then Satan has been stuck on earth. He's out of being chained for 1,000 years, because now all the lost people of all history are resurrected. And he gathers those people from the four corners of the earth, and they compass about the city, the holy city, come down out of heaven. And that's when fire comes down and consumes them. So, in the only place the 1,000 years is talked about, the saints of all time are taken to heaven, and they come down out of heaven at the end of the 1,000 years. So that's the only going to heaven and coming back from heaven of the saints and the holy city in any narrative about the 1,000 years. They're taken to heaven at the front, the beginning of the 1,000, and they come back to earth in the holy city at the end of the 1,000 years. Satan is alone with a bunch of corpses for 1,000 years on the earth, because it's without form and void, just like it was prior to the creation story. He's released from his prison because now the holy city has come down out of heaven. Jesus splits the Mount of Olives, and the holy city comes down on the earth, filled with all the saints of all history. And now that Jesus is returned, he resurrects the lost, the damned, and Satan gathers them. He's released for a season. That's him gathering all the lost that are resurrected to face final judgment. And he gathers them, and they try to attack the holy city, come down out of heaven, and fire comes down out of heaven and devours them. That is the lake of fire and the final judgment of the wicked, where they are destroyed, and God is all in all. You're welcome.